Well, I'm right behind a little trolley tour bus that stopped here at the Jim Thorpe grave. Jim Thorpe was an Olympian, Native American from Oklahoma, and it's kind of a long story how he was buried all the way out here in Pennsylvania, but that's what the town fathers and mothers thought of as a way to attract tourism, and renamed the town, which used to be called Mach Chunk. So I don't know if this tour bus is going to move forward or how I'm going to park in here, but figure it out here, see if there's any parking here. They have some informational plaques here. I'll take pictures of these and summarize them, but there's a good picture of Jim Thorpe. Played pro sports also. 1912 Olympics. I'll tell you what the Carlisle years are all about. A lot of stuff. Let me take pictures of these. So let me talk a little bit about who Jim Thorpe was. He was a legendary sports figure from the early 20th century. He was born in Oklahoma on an Indian reservation. He's half Native American, 1/4 Irish, and 1/4 French. And he excelled at all sports. And I don't know quite how it came to be, but he wound up going to what was called an Indian school in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, which is kind of near Jim Thorpe, not that close, but in the same general area of the state. And he excelled at sports in college there. And it was back when different schools had major powerhouse teams, and his team that he led defeated some of these other big name teams of the day, like Harvard and Army, the U.S. Military Academy. And then he was in the Olympics in 1912 in Stockholm, Sweden, where he won the decathlon and a similar event with just 5 events in it called the pentathlon. I don't think they have it anymore in the Olympics. They might, but I don't think so. And so he won gold medals in both. And the king of Sweden, who gave out the medals, was so impressed he told Jim Thorpe, this is a legend, but maybe it's true. He told Jim Thorpe, "You're the greatest athlete in the world." And Jim Thorpe's response was, "Thanks, King." And then he became a big star in professional sports. He was the first president of what became the NFL, and he kept playing, I think, until his early 30s. And every other sport he tried, like he supposedly rarely played golf, but he always shot a great score, like in the 70s. And he was just naturally gifted at any sport he ever tried. Unfortunately, later in his life, he became an alcoholic and went through 2 or 3 marriages, had a bunch of kids, but is still considered one of the greatest athletes of all time. And he's a legendary person for being a Native American and being so excellent at athletics. So that's the short story of Jim Thorpe. Well, that tour bus is finally leaving. But if it wasn't for the tour bus, I wonder how many people would come here. It's right by the road that comes into town, though. James Francis Thorpe. Pentathlon and decathlon. Gold medalist in Stockholm, Sweden. I should mention a couple of things too. Back in the day, they did not play football with helmets, so it must have been a real brutal sport. But I didn't mention that it was his main sport. But he also later on played baseball and did very well in that sport too. So those are just a couple of the sports. I also wanted to mention too that I think if Jim Thorpe was alive during today's sports climate, after his professional playing career ended, I'm sure he would have gotten a network job being an announcer, and that would have paid him very handsomely for a long time, probably the rest of his life. And he would have earned endorsements of products. There's so many ways that athletes can make a ton of money now that they could not make back in the early 1900s when pro sports was just getting off the ground and becoming a thing. And even when he was playing, he was one of the few players that actually made any kind of money, and most of the other players who were not as big a names made virtually nothing. So he did make something during those years, but as all athletes know, when your playing days end, your income really drops, and that was the case with Jim Thorpe. So going into alcoholism, it's always in your system. It's not something that just happens later on in life or whatever, or due to unfortunate circumstances. It's a condition, and I don't think it diminishes the way people should look at him at all. I think there's a lot of stories of athletes and other musicians, all walks of life, that have had to endure those kinds of afflictions with either alcohol or drugs and still are revered in society. And so Jim Thorpe, his star still shines very brightly, even though he had those things sort of put in his way and it affected his income at the end of his life. It's a pretty nice tribute. Jim Thorpe, 1888 to 1953. Nice thing to have on your headstones. Sir, you are the greatest athlete in the world. King Gustav of Sweden, 1912 Olympics. That's a cool statue. All right, Jim Thorpe. Let's look at the town that's named after him. So I did go see the town, and I have a separate video on that. But when I came here, I wanted to go to the grave first and not leave it till the end. And because I wanted to know more about Jim Thorpe, I figured there would be some informational plaques there, and there were. And it helped me gain a greater appreciation for the legendary sports figure that this town is named after. And I also did more reading about how it all came to be that a town would name itself or rename itself after a person and use that person's whole name, Jim Thorpe. There's only a handful of towns in the United States that are named after a person's full name. I can think of a couple like Albert Lee, Minnesota, and Carroll Stream, Illinois. One with an interesting story, one with a not very interesting story. But this is an interesting story that they didn't have much of a name to start with, Mach Chunk. And then there were actually two towns, East Mach Chunk and regular Mach Chunk. And they came to an agreement that the two towns would merge and become one named Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania. And I don't know how the widow of Jim Thorpe, his third wife, came in contact with people from Mach Chunk, but an arrangement was made where they would provide a suitable gravesite for him and rename the town. And I don't know if they also gave the widow money or something, but there was some allegations to that effect by some of the children of Jim Thorpe, who then have since sued, and it was going all the way up to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court wouldn't hear it, that the remains be disinterred and taken back to Oklahoma, and that's where the children felt he should be buried. So supposedly that's died down in the legal system, but you still wonder whether at some point there's going to be a change in heart and his remains will be taken back to Oklahoma, where he was from, and he'd be buried with his family members in Oklahoma. So it remains to be seen. It's a kind of an odd story to begin with, and it might not be all done. And when you're in the town of Jim Thorpe, you see a lot of Mauch Chunk names of things still. So it's kind of a town with a split personality. And I just thought that was an interesting backdrop to looking at a very interesting town with a very interesting name. So thanks for watching, and watch this video, and hope you watch the next one too.